Welcome to this explainer. Now, I want you to close your eyes for just a second and really try to imagine the sheer scale of the universe. It's incredibly vast, it's cold, and honestly, it is entirely silent. Okay, now think about the human heart, beating, feeling, desperately hungering for meaning, for purpose, and looking for our exact place in all of this. So, what happens when that deeply human hunger meets that infinite cosmic silence? Well, today, we're exploring the surprisingly life-affirming philosophy of Albert Camus. He's a thinker who literally stared directly into the void of existence and somehow found a way to smile. Okay, let's dive into this. For Albert Camus, philosophy didn't kick off with, complex abstract theories or dense mathematical formulas. It started with one stark, incredibly high-stakes question. Is life actually worth living? In his famous 1942 essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, he makes this bold declaration that judging whether life is or isn't worth living is the fundamental question of philosophy. Everything else, it just comes second. But before we can even attempt to answer if it's worth it, we kind of have to honestly look at how we actually spend our time. Consider the rhythm of the mundane. You wake up, take the streetcar commute, spend 4 hours in the office or factory, have a meal, do another 4 hours of work, and go to sleep. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We are all deeply, intimately familiar with this mechanical loop, right? And it functions perfectly smoothly most of the time. We're essentially just running on autopilot, going through the motions. But then, as Camus points out, one day the stage sets just collapse. The simple word why suddenly pops into our minds. And suddenly everything begins in this weariness tinged with existential amazement. That sudden disruption in our daily programming, that loss of our illusions, that is what opens the door to something Camus called the absurd. So what exactly is the absurd? Well, it's absolutely crucial to understand that for Camus, the universe itself isn't absurd. The universe is just irrational, silent, and naturally meaningless. And our human hunger for order, for familiarity, and for significance, that isn't absurd either. It's a perfectly natural instinct. No, the absurd is the irresolvable friction, the exact point of collision between our human desire for ultimate meaning and the universe's cold, unreasonable silence. It's the cruel asymmetry of these two totally mismatched things meeting face to face. Camus captures the core problem of the human condition so beautifully in just a single sentence. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. We build these grand meaning-giving frameworks, we search the stars for answers, we cry out for ultimate justice, and the cosmos, it simply stares back, saying absolutely nothing. So once we actually wake up to this incredibly uncomfortable truth, what do we do? How on earth do we respond to that silence? Camus noticed that humans generally try to escape this uncomfortable reality in two different ways, both of which he heavily criticized. The first is physical suicide, which is simply surrendering to the absurd by giving up on life entirely. Camus sought this not as an act of freedom, but as a total capitulation. You're just quitting the game. The other way is what he brilliantly called philosophical suicide, which is leaping into comforting, dogmatic illusions, forced religious beliefs, or utopian ideologies that promise meaning in some imagined future. Camus viewed both of these as totally illegitimate escapes from reality. He really agitated this problem by demanding that we face our condition without flinching, without false hope, and without appeal. So, the crucial point is, we must live authentically in spite of the absurdity. As he wrote, the absurd has meaning only insofar as it is not agreed to. If we can't escape through physical or philosophical suicide, the only option we have left is to stay alive and wrestle with that tension. We have to absolutely refuse to surrender to delusion or despair. And to show us exactly what this kind of defiant living looks like in practice, Camus turned to a legendary figure from ancient mythology. To really paint a picture of this defiant living, Camus resurrects Sisyphus in the closing passages of his essay. Sisyphus was known as the craftiest of mortals, a guy who loved the physical pleasures of life so deeply, so intensely, that he even dared to trick death and rebel against the gods themselves. He's the perfect, vivid, documentary metaphor for the human condition and our endless search for meaning. As punishment for his incredible defiance, the gods condemned Sisyphus to the ultimate futile task. First, he has to strain with all his might to push a massive, incredibly heavy rock all the way to the top of a mountain. Upon finally reaching the summit, he just has to stand there and watch the rock tumble all the way back down to the bottom. Then he turns around and trudges back down to start the whole agonizing process over again, forever. Camus points out how this grueling, infinitely repetitive punishment perfectly mirrors the modern worker's daily routine we talked about earlier. our everyday tasks, they can feel exactly like pushing that giant boulder. Now, what's really interesting about this is how Camus flips this tragic punishment completely on its head. He introduces this concept of metaphysical rebellion. You see, Sisyphus doesn't just suffer blindly like a victim. He becomes an absurd hero because he rebels by consciously accepting his struggle without any resignation. He completely reclaims his narrative. He scorns his fate not by crying about it, but by living vibrantly and embracing absolute freedom in the present moment, right there on the side of that mountain. Camus wrote, "There is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn." I want you to pay close attention to the exact moment Sisyphus turns away from the summit and begins walking back down the mountain to retrieve his rock. For Camus, this is the hour of consciousness. In that brief pause, as he trudges downward, Sisyphus fully understands the absolute wretchedness of his condition, and yet he consciously chooses to walk down anyway. In that lucid, tragic consciousness, he becomes superior to his fate. He is literally stronger than his rock. And this brilliantly illustrates how Camus' own philosophy evolved over his lifetime. If we only focus on solitary absurdism, kind of like his character Caligula, who murders with impunity because he thinks nothing matters, it can lead straight to destructive isolation, spite, and tyranny. Camus recognized this danger very clearly. So his later works shift to heavily emphasize a totally different path: human solidarity. He realized that because every single one of us faces the exact same silent universe, we actually share a profound bond. This realization shouldn't isolate us. It should lead to deep compassion, a shared struggle, and a collective rebellion against suffering. We absolutely must unite as fellow sufferers. This evolution is captured in such a brilliant twist on the philosopher René Descartes' famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am." Instead, Camus writes in his book The Rebel, "I rebel, therefore we exist." By acknowledging life's absurdity and revolting against it together, we bind humanity together in empathy. It proves that acknowledging the void doesn't have to tear us apart at all. It can actually be the very foundation that unites us to protect and care for one another. Let's see how this builds. It really culminates into a radical new way of living. Accepting life's uncertainty transforms it from a source of hopelessness into a source of profound strength. When you finally strip away all the false hopes of a guaranteed future or a perfect utopia or some afterlife, you aren't left with nothing. You are left with absolutely everything right here. You gain the ultimate freedom to fiercely experience the here and now, to genuinely value the physical beauty of the world, and to live with absolute lucidity and intensity. Which brings us to perhaps the most iconic conclusion in all of 20th century philosophy. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Even in a universe without a master, even when the rock rolls all the way back down, the very act of living, of pushing, of choosing to engage with life in all its messy, painful beauty is a victory. His rock is his thing. His fate belongs entirely to him. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought. As you push your own boulder today, how will you choose to revolt through joy? You might not be able to change the fact that the universe is silent or that the boulder will inevitably roll back down to the bottom, but your lucidity, your solidarity with others, and your defiant happiness are entirely yours to claim. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the beautifully absurd mind of Albert Camus. Now go out there, embrace the absurdity, and enjoy the push.